Hello, I'm your host, Brian Callanan. In a rare move, a city council committee has rejected a measure promising more affordable housing. The sponsor of that measure, Councilmember Tammy Morales, is talking to me about what happened to her Connected Communities legislation. Plus, she's weighing in on the city's growing budget concerns, police hiring, and the questions you're sending in too. It's all next on City Inside Out, Council Edition.
The way it stands now, this is planning for more expensive housing for the next 20 years, unless the draft changes.
All that and more coming up next on City Inside Out, Council Edition. And here she is, Councilmember Tammy Morales joining me. I very much appreciate the time.
Good to see you.
Now let's jump right into it. We are speaking just after the Land Use Committee that you chair voted not to pass the Connected Communities legislation you sponsored. This would cut red tape for nonprofits and community groups to build affordable housing, give them incentives like the ability to build bigger buildings. It's focused on areas of Seattle where there has been a history of redlining. It's proposed as a pilot program which would sunset in 2029 or when 35 projects are built, whichever happens first. I thought Councilmember Moore summarized one major point from the majority of the committee in saying that she'd rather use the comprehensive plan the council is working on to achieve this bill's goal.
In my opinion, a more effective approach to attaining citywide neighborhood affordability is to make the benefit of development capacity generally available to all, and to do so through the draft comprehensive plan currently before council.
You and your staff spent 2.5 years working on this bill through 5 committee meetings with a lot of partners from the community supporting this. Yep. And here we are. A no vote happens very rarely at the community, at the committee level, I should say, in the council. Tell me what happened here.
Well, what happened is that we had dozens of community organizations, Habitat for Humanity, El Centro de la Raza, the Housing Development Consortium, many different organizations support this work, particularly because they are interested in understanding what does it take to facilitate more development quicker, so that we can expand housing options across the city. I think all of us can agree we need more housing in more places in the city. The legislation would have allowed for cultural spaces, more affordable commercial space. So I think, this is really about ensuring that we allow for that kind of mixed income, mixed use development to happen in more places. That was the intent. There's a lot of support for that, including, I believe, from my colleagues. So I don't know. I worked hard to try to incorporate changes that did address the concerns that they have. As it relates to the comprehensive plan, the plan that we have is already 2 years late, and we have a crisis right now. We really can't wait for the passage of something that is still a year out in order to really start to address these challenges. That's one thing. The other thing I'll say is that many of the goals that are included in the draft comprehensive plan that we have right now include language that I already added to the comprehensive plan so that we could lay that vision for the future. Whether it's increasing density for housing or allowing more neighborhood commercial corner stores in different parts of the city, because we're really trying to allow for better access to essential goods and services in all of our neighborhoods, within walking distance.
Make it more walkable too, or close to transit.
15-minute city idea. So those are amendments that we had already included in the comprehensive plan and are already working to draft, to pass. So, I am hopeful that we can continue moving the comprehensive plan in the right direction. Why this particular piece of legislation was not supported when it would have achieved a lot of the things that my colleagues are interested in is not a question I can answer.
I guess I was paying close attention to this bill because it was the first piece of substantive legislation that really the council was working on that was up for a vote this year. So the full council will consider this bill on April 30th. Do you have any intention of trying to revise it any further and try to get some support for it?
Yeah, well, we will be talking to the council members who are not part of the Land Use Committee. And there are some options for presenting the substitute in full council, or even, addressing, introducing a slightly different version of it.
Okay.
We're still trying to figure out what the right strategy is.
Okay, this was disappointing. Is that the right way to describe this? I just wanted to make sure I got that across.
That is definitely a way to describe it.
Okay. Thank you for sharing all of this with me. I did want to talk a little bit more generally about the best way to build affordable housing in Seattle. I know you get a lot of emails on this. I certainly do too. I had a few viewers who expressed some different views about this, and I want to pass those along. Here's one. Why is it important to privilege development by nonprofits, which require highly limited subsidy, versus privately funded housing, which has vastly greater potential? There's one. Another viewer who likes to speak out for small landlords writes this: how much housing would connected communities provide, and how does it compare to the rentals lost in the past few years from small independent owners? I think both of these viewers are talking a little bit more about market-based solutions when it comes to affordable housing, and this idea of making it easier for privately funded housing for small landlords. How do you respond to that?
So we know that the city has been behind in our housing production for years, right? The city grew twice as fast as was expected in our last comprehensive plan, and we didn't build to accommodate that growth. So we're already behind, and we know that there's another, several 100,000 people coming to the city by 2030.
Right.
So we have a lot of work to do to catch up on the housing that we need. The market rate housing that's being developed is appropriate for one segment of our community, but we have 40,000 homeless people in King County, and they're homeless in large part because they can't afford rents. If the average rent is $1,700, $1,900 now, that's a lot of money, and if you can't afford to do that, you end up on the street. So there's a lot of work to do for the lower segments of the market.
Okay.
The Seattle Housing Authority can build for people below 30% of the area median income. But workers, teachers, grocery workers, baristas, gig workers, these are folks who need housing that is affordable to them too.
Okay.
And private developers don't build that kind of housing. If that housing was
could they not be incentivized further to build it? Or?
Well, that's part of what Connected Communities is for.
Okay.
So that is the goal. Part of the reason that that private developers struggle with building housing is because of some of the barriers that are put in place.
Right.
The permitting process takes a long time. The design review process gets in the way. And so the Connected Communities legislation was intended to eliminate some of those barriers to make it cheaper for them to build housing.
Right.
That's what we're trying to figure out, is what is the right mix of incentives that can make the creation of this housing easier. And it doesn't all have to be low-income housing. It doesn't all have to be market rate. Mixing incomes is a way to help cross-subsidize. It's also part of what the social housing model does.
We'll touch on that in a little bit too, sure.
So that's what we're trying to achieve, and I think we have to acknowledge that not everybody can afford market rate, and not everybody needs to be living in public housing. There is a big gap in the middle, and that's what we're trying to figure out.
Anything you want to say to the small landlords out there? I know this has been a brewing issue over the past couple months. Anything to that group?
Well, I think, we know that it is landlords, big and small, who are providing housing to our community. And there is an obligation, if you're contemplating being a landlord as a small business, you still have responsibility to your tenants. So I think, from my perspective, if you have decided that this is a business that you're going to run, then you still have to be held accountable for running your business properly.
Okay, thank you. You've raised a few issues about the comprehensive plan. I'd like to dive into that a little bit further. I think you've said a few times it doesn't go far enough when it comes to increasing density in Seattle, continues the status quo. You made mention at a meeting back in March. I wanted to show this map of these proposed regional centers that the comprehensive plan is talking about. These are key economic drivers for the city where growth will be encouraged. It left out basically all of your district in Southeast Seattle and District 2. There's basically nothing in South Seattle. I'll sneak in a few viewer questions to add to the setup here, if I may. Robin asks, what have you heard from your constituents about what they want from the comprehensive plan? Another viewer asks, if Seattleites want to see more housing in their neighborhood, what's the best way to express that to their council members? Please tell us, if you could, where do you want to guide this comp plan discussion? I know back in March, Cleveland High School actually hosted a public event to talk about this. Maybe some of your concerns about what's planned for your district or not planned for your district, and what you're hearing from your constituents, too.
Sure, that's a lot.
It is.
So I think what we're hearing in general as a reaction to this comp plan is that it doesn't go far enough. In the last couple of years, the planning department has done community outreach, and the vast majority of comments that they heard from people is that we need more housing. We need more housing that is affordable to workers. People want to be able to walk to a corner store, walk to a grocery store, a credit union, coffee shop. And right now, a lot of our zoning doesn't allow for that kind of neighborhood commercial development.
Yeah.
And that was in the original version of the comprehensive plan draft that the planning department sent to the mayor. We learned just this week that a lot of that stuff was stripped out. So the way it stands now, this is planning for more expensive housing for the next 20 years, unless the draft changes. And so I would encourage your viewers to send in their comments.
Right.
We are getting a lot of comments as council members, but we're not the ones who make the change. So let me find the email just to make sure.
Okay.
We have until May 6th to send comments directly to the department. And you can send your comments to oneseattlecomplan@seattle.gov. Whether you want to see more senior housing, whether you like townhomes or don't like townhomes, if you want to be able to walk to a corner store, they need to hear directly from our neighbors, and they need to hear by May 6th so that those comments can get incorporated into the final version.
Thank you. I'll make sure to get that all set up so that people are putting in those emails. Again, we're talking about getting some comments in on the comprehensive plan. With regard to specifically what's happening in District 2, though, I thought this was really interesting. Can you jump back on that regional centers idea? Because it looks like economic development is a part of this comp plan, perhaps more than we've seen before in plans in the past. And it really seemed like at least a good part of your neighborhood in your district was left out.
So the regional centers, I will say, are actually defined by the Puget Sound Regional Council.
Okay.
So they're the ones who decide where is the economic activity happening, what does it look like is an opportunity as a place to grow.
Okay.
So I have also started these conversations with PSRC because I sit on the Growth Management Policy Board.
Okay.
But yes, the South End has been left out for a long time as an intentional place to grow. And given what we know about District 2, which is that it is an area of high risk of displacement and low access to economic opportunity, it is my belief that we need to be intentionally planning to create a regional economic center in the South End. What that looks like, I don't know.
Okay.
But, for example, in the last few years, we've had the Odessa Brown Children's Clinic has opened. I don't know that we need to become a medical hub, although the South End does lack medical facilities.
Yeah.
But a building like that brings hundreds of jobs to the neighborhood, good jobs, hopefully union jobs.
Sure.
And so these are opportunities for our young people, for folks who are underemployed, for people who need economic opportunity in their community, and that's what I'm hoping we can start to drive toward.
Okay. And a lot still ahead with that. Again, let's get those comments in by May 6th. We're talking about the comprehensive plan here. Appreciate the back and forth on that. Just a last housing issue as we go through here. I want to touch again on social housing. You brought this up earlier. Social housing, Seattleites voted for this last year. There was I-135 establishing this public development authority to develop, own, and maintain publicly financed mixed income social housing developments. So the PDA, as I understand it, has some trouble getting off the ground in terms of securing its operational funding from the city and the state as well. There's a group collecting signatures right now to try to set up a more stable funding mechanism. I'm going to put that off to the side for a little bit. I just wanted to get this basic idea of what this was all about. There was an email I got about this as well. One writer actually threw in, Pete threw this. Why does our government not incentivize development of workforce housing? I know you were a champion of this social housing measure last year. What does the future of this program look like?
Well, it's a bright spot, in my opinion. We passed the Social Housing Public Development Authority, so that entity exists. As you mentioned, it is waiting for the contract and the funding so that they can really get set up. But this is an opportunity for us to really add an important component to the sort of portfolio of how housing gets built in the city. Social housing is permanently affordable housing. And like I was saying before, for a mix of people.
Right.
So it has the benefit of within each building, providing high-quality housing for low-income renters and for, middle and higher income.
Right. It can actually go above the area median income for some people.
And the intent there, well, there's several
Levels,
several intentions
Right.
with that. One is to provide housing for a mix of people within one building. The second is to that is permanently affordable. The second is to sort of eliminate that class segregation that you get when lots of low-income people are in public housing and lots of high-income people are in market-rate housing. That doesn't create healthy, vibrant community. So putting folks in the same space with the same high-quality kind of apartments is an important goal of this as well.
Okay.
And then the last thing I'll say is that in social housing, the rent is proportional to income.
That's right.
Right? So everybody who is in the building pays 30% of whatever their income is.
Right.
And the intention there is to try to cross-subsidize.
So that the higher rents can help pay for the lower.
Right, and help pay for operations and maintenance costs and that sort of thing. So it has a lot of benefits, not the least of which is really just creating permanent affordability for folks so that we stop pushing people out of the city.
Are you concerned about the dollars, though, and getting this thing really started? It just sounds like it's had a tough time getting off the ground.
I will say, the initiative that passed last year passed by 60% of the vote.
People clearly were wanting this.
People want to see something like this happen. I think it is incumbent upon the elected officials who are managing this contract process to get busy.
Okay.
So, we were able to put, I think it was $200,000 in from the city. My office worked with Frank Chop to get another $800,000 from the state. This entity has been waiting for a year now for that funding, and they need to hire staff. They need to hire a CEO. They need to start their fundraising campaigns.
Right.
So we need to get busy and support their success.
Okay, we will see what happens there. Thank you for that. And as we're talking about money getting spent, the council has jumped into its budget process here in April, earlier in the year than it ever has, at least in recent memory. Councilmember Dan Strauss was talking about this. He is the chair of the Select Budget Committee. He called the first meeting of that committee an audit of the budget.
This is the review and examination of our city budget that has not been done before. The definition of audit is a review and examination of your work. So for anyone who wanted an audit of our budget, this is it.
You've spoken out about your concerns regarding the budget. You wrote a piece in the Seattle Times op-ed page that said, unless the city does its work to find progressive revenue, we're looking at an austerity budget for this year with some cuts to some critical programs. You also said some of your colleagues have acknowledged the need to keep an open mind on revenue. As we get into this budget process, we're a couple months after you had that op-ed in the paper. Do you think those minds are still open? What are we seeing?
I don't know yet. What I will say is that we are at the beginning of the process of having a really much better understanding of what our situation is. So we had the economic revenue forecast that came out yesterday. The reality is that as a city, we're pretty limited in ways to raise revenue.
Right.
So, whether it's, depending on the kind of services that we have, whether it's capital or operations or programs or contracting out with human service workers to work on our behalf, we have an obligation to provide these essential services to our community. And we have limited ways to pay for that.
Right.
So that's going to be the challenge that we have. If revenue from property taxes and sales tax and B&O tax, if all of that is fairly stable, but the cost of providing these services is going up, then we're going to have to figure out how to fill that gap.
Okay.
And so, the progressive payroll tax, the jumpstart tax we passed several years ago, has been able to backfill a lot of that. But we're going to have to look at how we expand that tax or contemplate some of the other ideas that were created by the Revenue Stabilization Task Force that met 2 years ago, I believe.
Right.
So they came up with several different ideas. I think it is going to be incumbent upon us as a council to look at ways to increase revenue. We're going to have to make cuts. Those are going to be very hard conversations. My hope is that we do as little harm as possible to our city workers and to the services and the end user of those services, because we have to keep in mind that any cut we make, there's a person at the other end of that who will be impacted by it. So my approach going into this is to do as little harm as possible.
Got it. And in terms of that amount we're talking about, $240 million, that's grown just a little bit, I will say, over the past week or so, because the council recently approved some raises for city workers, increase in between 4% and 5% until 2026 for some 11,000 workers out there. I know this added a little bit to the city's budget deficit, but I know it was a move that you and other council members supported here. Can you tell us why?
Well, because it's not a raise, it is a cost of living adjustment. So there's a difference, right? A raise is a merit-based adjustment. These are dealing with the fact that we've had record high inflation for the last couple of years, a 10-year high, I believe. And so wages haven't kept up with that. And these are, as I said, workers who are providing essential services to the city. So, we all deserve to have a cost of living adjustment so that we can pay our own bills. And our city workers deserve the same.
Yeah, I did want to talk about another issue when it comes to personnel. The city's also in negotiations with the Seattle Police Officers Guild with an agreement that would give these rank-and-file officers a 23% raise. And Council President Sarah Nelson is trying to boost officer hiring in other ways, too, by improving and streamlining the hiring process, as she puts it. She brought up in a recent meeting this idea of changing the entry test the Seattle Police Department uses from the National Testing Network exam used in bigger cities like San Francisco, 68% of applicants pass that, to the public safety test, or PST, which has a 90% pass rate and is used by several agencies in our state.
Applicants apply to multiple jurisdictions, and so when they take the PST test, once it's on file, and they can designate which agencies get that score. And if they have to use another test that nobody else is using, that is, that's a disincentive to include Seattle in their application process.
What are your thoughts about this idea of the city streamlining its police hiring process as Seattle keeps losing more officers than it can hire?
Well, what I'll say about the test in particular is that the reason Seattle uses that test is because we've been under a consent decree for 12 years. Yeah. And we've been under a consent decree because of the biased policing in our force.
And the use of force, too,
Use of force, unconstitutional policing.
Right.
And so there is a very valid reason why we use a different test, because we do have higher standards. We want to make sure that we're screening out officers who have, poor judgment or have some other issues that may contribute to an increase in use of force, unnecessary use of force. Got it. So I don't believe that using a test that is easier to pass and doesn't screen that out is an appropriate step. I understand that we are several hundred officers down from where the force has been in the past, but that's not because of the test necessarily. It's just because the training and the academy process is slow. It takes a year to get through the academy. There are a lot of places along the way that contribute to the length of time it takes to bring people in. And so maybe there are some adjustments in how we tweak the timeline there. Okay. But I don't think that making the test easier for officers to pass is the right approach.
Got it. And just this whole idea of streamlining the process overall, I think the council's been contemplating a few ideas. Let's make sure we reach out to these recruits potentially sooner. Let's talk about some more hiring bonuses and things of that nature. Any ideas there? Because you've heard these briefings as well as I have. The Seattle Police Department is at its lowest staffing level since the 1990s, and that just doesn't seem right to a lot of people. Help me out with that idea of trying to build up the police department to where it needs to be.
Well, I think, I think what we have seen nationally is that there is just a decline. This isn't unique to Seattle, right? Right? Cities across the country are having a hard time recruiting officers, in part, I think, because the idea of what it means to be an officer has changed. The interest, I guess, is diminishing. I will say here in Seattle in particular, we've had, I am assuming that we're having a hard time in part because of the culture of the department itself. Okay. We have, lots of women in particular who have
made some complaints, yes.
Who have sued the department for discrimination and harassment. And when 50% of the population doesn't feel like they're welcome in a department, it makes it hard to contemplate how you start to address those recruitment strategies. Okay. So I think there are some process issues that could be addressed, but I also think there are some cultural and departmental management issues that need to be addressed so that people are more interested in coming to the department.
Thank you. A lot going on there for sure, and I appreciate you engaging with that. I did want to talk about another labor issue that's coming up here in the month of April, Seattle's gig worker minimum wage law. The council passed this measure in 2022 with input from app companies, drivers, and advocates. It went into effect here in 2024, but when it did, companies like DoorDash put this $5 fee in place, which local restaurants say has really hurt their orders. Council President Nelson is talking about this as well, wants to make some changes to this law, maybe reducing the mileage rate reimbursements or maybe reducing the overall minimum wage. And I knew you've raised some concerns about that, including we don't have any hard data from the app companies when it comes to how much this law is affecting them financially. Can you talk about this issue?
Yeah, well, I haven't seen the legislation. I don't know that it's even drafted yet.
It's still in process, yes.
But what I will say in general is that Seattle is a labor town. This is a union city. Protecting workers is important. We passed a minimum wage law 10 years ago because we understand that workers deserve a living wage and they deserve protections. And so when we hear about app workers being retaliated against or, being cut off of the app for whatever reason, it really raises red flags. Okay. I think, for me, the crux of the issue here is that these workers deserve a minimum wage. Okay. And, for the companies to add a $5 fee onto the cost also seems retaliatory. So we'll see what the legislation looks like. I'm looking forward to engaging with that. But I think, the main issue for me is making sure that these workers are protected and they're not retaliated against.
Thank you. Briefly, another important issue for you, Transportation Vision Zero, the city's dedication to prevent traffic-related deaths, which have been on the rise in our state. The Seattle Department of Transportation Director Greg Spots presented the proposal for the new Move Seattle levy. The voters will consider this fall. Is down in Rainier Beach back here in April, joined by the mayor, several other community members. A $1.35 billion proposal here, going to be the largest in Seattle history. And I know the council's reviewing this. Some ideas, some big picture ideas about where you want this conversation to go. Yeah,
well, I will say that, for me, the priority is pedestrian safety, safety of our streets and sidewalks. In the South End, we have the highest rate of traffic fatalities in the city. And we have some major arterials. We have sidewalks that are incomplete or crumbling. And so for me, the real priority is going to be around pedestrianization of roads and sidewalks, how we ensure that we are building out. I think right now it's estimated it would take 400 years to build all the sidewalks that we need in the city.
Right.
And that's because of the particular cost of doing it a particular way. I'm excited that Director Spots does seem to really be prioritizing safety and is willing to look at alternative ways of creating safe pedestrian pathways for our neighbors. That's a key issue for me. Connecting our pedestrian networks, our bicycle networks, so that people can get around the city and get out of their cars is going to be an important priority if we're really going to meet our climate change goals as well. So a lot of systems that are connected through our transportation levy, and they all have to be considered and supported.
All right. Thank you very much. This is Councilmember Tammy Morales from District 2. Thank you very much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, everybody watching on Council Edition. See you next time.